Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Lisa, or L.J. Cohen, who is a speculative fiction author. She's written both science fiction and fantasy. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, Lisa, how would you describe what you write?
So I like the umbrella term speculative fiction because to me that encompasses everything I write. In a way, the setting is less important to me than telling very small scale human stories against a fantastic backdrop. So um, if you know photography, right, there's that sense of you can take a picture of something close up or far away. So that's that figure ground sort of thing. And some writers write stories of ideas, and I think those are the ground, right? The big ideas, the big scientific thoughts. I tend to write stories focused on the figure, the character, the journey that they're going through in this environment. So rather than stories of abstract ideas, they're stories of real people, but in fantastic settings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. What do you think draws people to these kinds of books?
For me, as a young reader, when I started out reading, it was all about going on an emotional journey with a character. And that's what I think people get from reading my books is they go on an emotional journey, and it's a satisfying emotional journey where they experience sort of all the ranges of emotion from joy to heartache to fear to bravery, and at the end I hope that they feel hope and change.
Okay. So you've written several series. You've written the Halcyon series, which is a science fiction
Yep.
series, and you've also written Changeling's Choice series,
Yeah, which is a
a
portal fantasy. Yep.
sort of fantasy series. And you're working on a new series.
Yes, it actually will be a series. I already know
Oh,
a lot of what's happening in the second book. Um, I wish I had a title for this story. It would make it so much easier to talk about, but titles are the bane of my existence. So this is an as yet untitled multiverse story, which basically deals with found family and healing trauma set in modern day Boston. And it starts on the night of the homeless census, where a young girl who is from a family of multiverse travelers goes on her first journey with her parents, and it ends disastrously. She ends up separated from her parents, and her disembodied consciousness lands in the body of a young woman who has just died of a drug overdose. So she wakes up in a strange world in a new body and has no idea what to do. So that's the sort of inciting incident of the story. And she creates a support network, a found family, and it's about trying to find your place in the world or the multiverse, whichever is most appropriate. Um,
wow.
yeah, and it wasn't until after I finished the first draft that I realized that there are some echoes in there of Wizard of Oz. We have characters who are on a journey to find their strengths, and we've got this lost girl, and there's even a telepathic dog. Um, I needed this character in the story because it's a very intense, very deep story, and I needed some character to bring a little balance and lightness. So we have a telepathic dog.
So what was the inspiration for this story?
So when I was very young, six, maybe 6 or 7, not older than that, my family took a trip to Spain. And I only have a few really solid memories from that trip. One of them was going to the formal gardens at a place called El Alhambra, which is, I believe, in northern Spain. And we went there, and it was a rainy day, and I was I was a rammy little kid. I couldn't sit still. So my parents let me run around the formal gardens in the rain. And in some way, I felt like there were ghosts there. I just had this sense, there was almost this tingling. I can feel it now when I even think of the memory that I felt that there were, and I didn't understand it. I was 6. It wasn't until almost a decade later when I learned that El Alhambra was the place where the Jews were expelled from Spain. They were told that they either had to convert or die or leave. And that memory has stuck with me my whole life. And so I thought, let's take a character who has this childhood memory and see where it goes. And instead of seeing ghosts, as a small child, she saw a portal to another world and suppressed the memory for her whole life. So that was the character that I thought was the main character of my story. Turns out that she wasn't. She was the doctor who was on scene to resuscitate the character that my main character falls into. So that's
Wow.
really where the whole story started, was this memory that I've been carrying around since I was 6 or 7 years old.
Hmm. So it seems as though you kind of put yourself into the book.
A little bit. I think all authors put themselves, I mean,
Yeah.
you can't write a character unless you have felt something of what they feel. And so there's this empathy that you have to have as a writer so that you can mine your own emotions and the emotions of those people who are around you.
Right. So what kind of research did you have to do,
Oh, I did
if
a
any?
ton of reading. So I did a whole lot of reading on physics. Like there's some great particle physics for dummies books out there, which is great because I'm not a particle physicist, but I had to at least be able to conceptualize sort of the concepts of entanglement and whether multiverse does exist and travel between them could happen. So I read a ton. Plus, a good friend of mine, her spouse is a particle physicist. So I was able to shoot some questions to him. And I'm glad that he didn't find my questions dumb or, beneath him. He's a big sci-fi fan. So it was kind of fun to be able to talk to an expert. I also ended up reading a whole bunch of Judith Butler. She's a feminist writer who writes a lot about identity, because if you're in another body, who are you? Like, are you the same person? Have you changed? So reading that, it's very dense. It's very academic, but boy, it was really interesting. Um, how much of any of the stuff that I studied is actually in the book? Very little, but it helps. It's the glue that I think that ties the story together, is having that knowledge underlie what I write, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Now, do you have any favorite research story in any of your books, from any of your books?
Oh Lordy. I I could get lost in every rabbit hole in the universe. I mean, I was the kid who, like, I mean, I grew up before Wikipedia, so I was the kid who had an encyclopedia set in the house, and I would sit down and I'd open a book and I'd find a topic and it would say see seashells, and I would go to the S book and I'd look at seashells, and then it would say, sea saltwater or sea submarines or sea nautil. I mean, and I would spend hours doing that. And I think one of the pitfalls for me is doing research and going so far afield and losing the thread of the story and realizing that no, I'm actually not writing, I'm procrastinating. I do
Oh,
worry about my search history though, um, because I've researched so many bizarre things for novels. So for one of my Halcyon Space novels, um, I was researching things like how to booby trap spaceships and blow things up in space. So, you know, I've researched how to murder people with garrots, just different books require all sorts of different things. And, I'm like, hello, FBI people, I'm really a writer. I'm not, I'm not gonna blow things up, only in my books. Thank you.
Okay. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out your last book?
So my last book was published in 2018, I think. That was the fifth book of the series,
Right.
of the Halcyon Space series. And honestly, I think the hardest part was saying goodbye to these characters that had lived in my head for close to a decade. Um, I went through a really long, almost mourning period. I mean, these characters lived in me for so long that I would walk around the world and see things through their personalities, their voices. I know that sounds a little kind of woo-woo, but
Mm-mm.
it's almost like you've got this hologram inside, and everywhere you look, you see pieces of the world that you've created. And closing that up, and the other sort of technical challenge of writing a series that's 5 books long is every time in the early books the action flags, you just throw another problem at your characters. But at some point, you actually have to solve them all. And that fifth book, I had to close all the circles I had opened. And that was a technical challenge. Um, Things like remembering the name of a tertiary character that is mentioned in passing, but you have to link it back. So I actually ended up creating a personal wiki, like going through all the books and throwing all the information in this wiki, because you can't keep all that in your head. I mean, maybe somebody can, but I can't. So, those were definitely difficult. Um, but in the end, really satisfying, because I think I crafted an ending that worked for the series, it worked for the characters, and it left the reader feeling like this was a real world that would continue even though this story had ended.
Aha. That's very interesting. I would think that a lot of times the a complaint that people have with some series is that the authors sometimes just get it wrong. They they like misname some of the people from past
Yep,
books or
yep.
things like that. I've
Because
heard that.
here's the problem, right? When you're writing a book, you end up going down a lot of sort of dead ends and backtracking and making changes. But it's like a multiverse, because all the different
Mhm.
decision points, all the different stories are in your head. And sometimes you don't remember the version you actually wrote. Like, oh no, I cut that. That's on the editing room floor. That character got cut. I can't reference that character. They're not in the story anymore.
Right. Oh,
Hence the
that's
wiki was
good point.
invaluable. Plus, it got sent to my editor, and she used that as part of her guide to edit the books. So that was super helpful.
Oh, that is a brilliant idea to do that.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm a big fan. I mean, some people use spreadsheets, but spreadsheets don't feel natural to me. I really like the wiki concept.
Okay. So was there one character in your latest book that you're working on that you love or hate the most?
Oh, love the most. I love Poplar. Poplar is my telepathic dog. And I've lived with dogs for a long time. I've had pet dogs for forever. And she, while she can communicate with just a few of the characters, um, She actually is the companion of a gentleman named Thorn, who comes from a different world. He comes from a world where he is considered a truth scryer. He sees multiple paths in the future and helps guide people to make the right choices. He's kind of like a Cassandra because people don't listen to him and everything turns out badly. And so he's a very disaffected, very sad, very tortured soul. And somewhere in his travels, he found Poplar, and he doesn't understand why he can communicate with Poplar. Poplar's never been able to communicate with anybody else, but they are a team, and she brings a lighthearted, almost single-minded focus on things like cheese. She likes cheese and she smells it and she wants it. And she is a very primary process thinker, as dogs can be. But she's also a very empathic creature, and she is able to help the other characters come to terms with their own emotions, because it's easy to talk to a dog. You know, they don't have a whole lot of expectations of you other than kindness. And so writing Poplar scenes was an exercise in, if my dogs ever talked back, because I talk to my dogs all the time.
Of course.
And the challenge was making Poplar sound like a dog without being a caricature, right? I really wanted people to care about Poplar. And this is my promise, the dog does not die in the end. Just so you know, I would never do that. Just not me.
So, when can we expect to see that book?
Well, first of all, it needs a bloody title. Um, Titles are hard. Titles are the bane of my existence. So I am 2/3 of the way done with my second major revision round. I've gotten some feedback from beta readers that the story works, and I'm just working through incorporating some minor changes, smoothing things out, making sure I don't reference characters who are no longer in the book, that sort of thing. My hope is that it'll be out either in late 2023 or early 2024. But it needs a title first. I don't think anyone is going to buy a book that says Untitled Multiverse Story. It's not going to fly.
No, I don't think so. But everyone will know if a book comes out by L.J. Cohen, that's the book you're talking about.
That's the book we're talking about. And I will certainly talk about, it's where we are in the process on my website and blog and social media and
So,
stuff. So
what else can we hear from you in the future? What else can we expect?
this book definitely has a sequel. Um, I left a character in a precarious position at the end of this story that I will either hear them howl across the universe, or they'll go, oh yeah, what's going to happen next? I'm not quite sure how it's going to be. I think it's an appropriate ending. I I I think people will understand why I chose to do what I chose to do. Um, and the other story that's been tickling the back of my brain is kind of like, do you remember the show from the 80s or 90s called Northern Exposure?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's the story, for people who aren't familiar, it was the story of a young New York City medical student who gets his medical education paid for this tiny town in Alaska, and in return he has to work there for X number of years. So it's a real fish out of water story. Well, in back of my brain, I am thinking of writing a story that is Northern Exposure meets All Creatures Great and Small, but in space, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
I have this human doctor whose medical education has been paid for by some galactic authority, and she has to go and work an underserved area for X number of years. And she has kind of a broken down AI medical assistant and gets herself in all sorts of scrapes because she's working with aliens and human civilizations who have diverged so much from where she's from because they've lived in isolation or whatever. I don't quite know where it's going to go, but I really like the idea and I like the character, and I think it could be interesting, fun. Um, I don't write comedy. I don't write lighthearted. I think if I had a personal brand, I write earnest punk. Like all my stories, the characters are earnest. They deeply care about the things they care about. And this would be no exception. But uh, I have there's juice in the idea, and I think it would be a lot of fun to write.
Hmm.
And it could
That's
be a series.
great. That sounds great. Now do you have a publisher that you use?
I currently am my own publisher. I've been sort of through the agent go round, the agent roulette. I had an agent for a number of years. She couldn't sell the books I was writing. I couldn't write the books she could sell. We parted amicably. Um, this book, this multiverse book, may be a book that is better suited for traditional publishing. I'm not sure. Um, I have some writer friends who have wanted to introduce me to their agents because they like the story. I might go that round. I might not. I haven't decided yet. I mean, I turned 60 this year and I'm kind of an impatient person. So the publishing timelines, I don't know if I have it in me to go through that again. We'll see.
How difficult is it to self-publish?
I don't think it's really all that difficult. I mean, I'm kind of a tech head, so I hand code my own ebooks. I kind of like that kind of stuff. I have a friend who used to work for Harvard University Press and taught me so much about typesetting for print, so I do all that myself. I the two things that I need a team for is cover art. Fun fact, I have aphantasia. I do not have a functioning mind's eye. I do not see pictures when I close my eyes. So for me, I don't draw, I don't paint. It's just not what I do. So I need to hire cover artists, and I have a couple that I work with that I love. And I hire a really good editor. Um, I can do a lot in terms of preparing a manuscript for my editor, but I can't see my blind spots. You get too close to it, it's virtually impossible. And so I have found that you get what you pay for in editorial services.
Hmm. That's good. That's good.
Uh,
So go ahead.
and the other thing is, people ask all the time about what about publicity? What about, getting your books out there? I don't do any of that. I am just not suited for self-promotion. So, you know, I tend to, I mean, do I have a social media presence? Yes. Do I talk about buy my books? Very rarely. Mostly I talk about my farm and my dogs and my knitting and my pottery. And occasionally I remind people that I have books out there, but maybe for every 30 or 40 or 50 posts about something else, there may be one post about my writing. And
Interesting.
honestly, I'm in a place in my life where, I mean, when I was in my 30s and 40s, I was ambitious. I had dreams. I had wanted to be a bestseller. I turned 60 this year. I have gotten to the point where I don't want a life of ambition. I want a life of purpose and engagement. And I have that, right? I my books sell enough copies that they earn out their publication expenses and allow me to bankroll the next book. And that's okay. Because quite honestly, if I needed to support my family, I would still be a physical therapist. I did that for 25 years, and it's a lot more lucrative than writing books, right? So, you know, I will write because it's what I'm passionate about, and I try to be as professional as I can in what I put out into the world. I will never be a six-figure writer, and I am absolutely okay with that. My books
Hmm.
touch people, right? They're read, people like them. I get emails from people. It's all good.
That is wonderful. That is really important. It's great to know that when you write, you certainly don't expect to you know, a lot of people so, don't expect to make six figures. You you really can't expect that.
No. And I think if that's what you are chasing, I know a lot of people who have chased after that kind of money with rapid releases and publicity blitzes and ad campaigns, and they burn out. And
Yeah.
I'm I'm just not, that's not the stage of my life that I'm in. My children are grown. They're out, they're living their own lives. They're independent. My spouse is semi-retired. We have this farm. I wake up every morning and I feel like I have purpose. I have creativity. I feel like I'm in a really fortunate place.
And you enjoy the writing.
I do. I really do. Even when I want to beat my head against the wall because it's not working, or I mean this book that I'm writing now, I have been writing for 5 years, which is the longest single project that I've ever worked on. I mean, I the shortest book I ever drafted was 4 months. The average draft for me is about a year. This has taken 5. And I would, I think 3 or 4 times I got to about the 25%, 30% mark, and it wasn't working. And I dumped all the words and started all over again. 4 times.
Are you a pantser or an outliner?
Neither. Um, I think that's kind of a false dichotomy that's very prevalent in writer circle. So I tend to have a core idea. And if you ever played the game Clue as a kid, Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick, right? So I have character in a place with a problem. That's the core of almost all my stories. And then there are concentric rings of information that get built around that particular character in that place with the problem, like what's the immediate world they're in, who are the people around them, who are helping them, who are hindering them, what's the larger backdrop, the politics, the society, that sort of thing. So my book builds like that. I always know where they start. I almost always have a few scenes that are guiding light scenes that I know I'm working towards. And I have a sense of the conclusion. And then I just start writing. And so I'm always writing towards something, but it's not an outline. And it's also not pure discovery. So it's sort of like navigating by GPS. You go to one direction, and then, in 3,000 feet, turn left in 1 mile. That's sort of how my books get written. I know the destination, I know a few waypoints, and then the rest is discovery.
Hmm. Okay. So, I have questions now about being a writer. What is your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Carrying universes in my head. Like you're never alone, right? There's always ideas floating around. Um, and ideas are everywhere. Like, go for a walk, you'll find 5 ideas. Listen to NPR for half an hour, you'll find a dozen ideas. And I love that sense of ooh, shiny, and thinking of ideas, and having those characters' lives enrich my life. It's it, it's magic, right? The fact that you create something that never existed and it becomes real to you and to your readers. I mean, that is just pure magic.
It is. So what do you consider the most challenging part of your writing career?
Um, there's a lot. I think it depends on the project. Um, for this book, the book I'm working on right now, I had just finished the 5-book Halcyon series, and it was really hard to find a new voice for a new kind of book. And my characters from Halcyon were still really taking up my creative space. So mourning that loss, sort of those old friends who had moved on, right? Or I had moved on, and trying to write something new. And I was struggling with the writing. I chose the wrong character. I didn't have the right point of view. I trashed it a bunch of times and started all over again. I think the hardest part was trusting that I still had things to say, even if it was hard, even if I was doubting my ability as a writer. I had to trust I had written before, I could write again. And yeah, that was probably, I really had a crisis of faith, I guess you could say, in my own ability as a writer, because I thought, I've written all these books. Why can't I get this one done?
Mhm. I know that a lot of authors have the self-doubt, even though they've written tens of, 10 books or more.
Or more. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Um,
that's what I've been hearing from a lot of authors. It's the self-doubt that they really have a problem with.
and fear, right? This was a big book for me. It had a lot of huge themes and a lot of emotional resonance. And I'm like, have I bit off more than I can chew? Can I actually get this done? Can I write this big idea that I have and make it on a scale that feels really human and really personal to readers?
Okay. So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Um, I don't know if you'd call this an adventure, but I wrote a bunch of short stories. I'm not a natural short story writer. I think people are either sprinters or marathoners. I'm a marathoner. I write 100,000 word novels. I find short stories really, really difficult, which is ironic because I write poetry and that's super, super short and compressed. But somehow the key to short stories has mostly eluded me. I've maybe written a dozen of them that I'm proud of at any given point. And so I put out a little collection of short stories as a free gift to newsletter subscribers. And then I just toss it up on Amazon and it's $1 for the ebook. And, it sells copies now and again. I don't really think about it. But I got this email from a college professor in South America who had read the collection and he wanted to have permission to use one of the short stories in his literature class.
Wow.
And that was one of the most amazing moments. That really it felt right. It felt good. I was just really, really happy with that.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah, and the short story, it was a very short story. It was maybe only 3,000 words. And it was the story of what if the angel of death was tired of doing her work in this story, she's a woman, and she clothes herself as a human being to walk through a town in the Black Plague times and her seeing on the ground sort of how people suffer. It was a really beautiful little story, and it was called The Plague Doctor's Lament. And in a way, it was almost an extended narrative poem. Um, But yeah, I thought it was a story with a lot of beauty in it, and obviously it resonated with someone. So yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, yeah. That's again your excuse me, your excuse me, your heart. That's
Yes, absolutely. Everything I write is from the heart. It is earnest, but that's who I am. And I think you have to play to your strengths as a creator.
Mhm. What is the greatest lesson that you've learned during your writing career?
Oh my God. Well, don't go it alone. The forest is dark and scary. You need friends. And if anyone tells you they have the secret special sauce for success in publishing, they are either deluded victims of survivor bias or they're trying to scam you.
Okay. Um, so what do you have any other pieces of advice that you'd like to give for new writers?
Surround yourself with creative people who want the best for you, who will understand your vision and push you to make it the best it could be.
Ah, okay. Excellent thoughts. And that kind of brings me to my next question is, are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that
Oh,
might have helped you?
absolutely, especially in the spec fic world. So I am a member of Broad Universe, which is a group that supports women and underrepresented genders writing in spec fic. And it's a national group. I actually think it may be even international. I know we have some Canadian members, so yeah, international. And it's a wonderful organization. Some of my best writing friends I have met through Broad Universe. I'm also a member of SIFWA. I was actually one of the first crew of indie authors that was able to get SIFWA membership. And that's the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. And they're a great group. Um, who else? Oh, Writer Beware, I think, is a great organization to at least keep your eye on because they are great at scam busting. And there are a lot of scams out there, and newbie writers really need to be careful not 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 to get caught up in that sort of thing. And another community that I'm a member of that is not exclusive to spec fic, but is welcoming to spec fic is something called Writer Unboxed. It's a blog, it's a website. They run conferences every couple of years. Another amazing, supportive group of writers. Um, just they will people in these groups will absolutely push you and in a loving way to get your vision out on the page. Because in the end of the day, that's what makes a writer, right? You can have great ideas, but if you don't communicate them, if you don't get them out on the page, you don't you don't um you don't complete the circle, right?
Absolutely.
For any art form, if it's not seen, appreciated, read, um, I hate the word consumed, but that people use that word. That's the communication piece, right? Art is a constructivist activity. You've got the artist who creates, and you've got the person who appreciates. And I think without that connection, it's hard to succeed as a piece of art. Art doesn't exist in isolation, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Okay, now I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Um, so I describe myself as a recovering city mouse. I grew up in and around New York City. I lived in Manhattan. Um, I am comfortable navigating subways and I love cities, but I currently am living on a farm in a little rural community in central Mass, and we have 54 acres and two tractors and two chainsaws and a chipper, and I know how to use them all. I'm actually in my farmer overalls right now because I have to go weed the asparagus patch today.
Wow.
I
Okay.
honestly, when I drive my tractor, sometimes the theme song for Green Acres sort of plays in the back of my head. Never would I have thought I'd end up on a farm.
Oh, wow. Okay. What question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
Oh, Lordy, that is a really hard question.
It is.
I don't know. I can't answer that question, but I can sort of morph it around. I can say the question that I hate when people ask me, and
Okay, that's
that's,
good.
what's your favorite fill in the blank? The minute somebody says, what's your favorite show, movie, book, my mind completely goes blank. And I can't, I mean, I have things I love. I start to stammer and I can't think of it. Hate that question.
Oh,
Don't ask
okay,
that
that's
question.
good. I won't ask that question. Okay. So what is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how
So
do you make
I,
time?
yeah, I look at my life as a balance of different creative influences. And in the end, all creativity is one creativity. I think they all feed each other. So I don't necessarily
Yeah.
worry about balancing them. Um, my main creative outlets, aside from writing, are pottery. So you've not seen me drinking from this. This is one of mine. I call these dragon belly mugs. I do hand building, I do wheel throwing. Um, I like mad science, so I've connected with a local studio and I am the glaze chemist. So I have a room at the studio that is filled with canisters of all of this wild material, powdered material. And I get to mix glazes and test glazes. I've got one of those like big bug masks, the P100 masks. I swear to God, I feel like the guy from Breaking Bad every time I go into the glaze chemist room. But there's something about learn. I am an insatiably curious person, right? And for me, I start to get the heebie-jeebies when I don't have a chance to learn something new. So for me, like this past year has been this deep dive into glaze chemistry. Maybe someday it'll find its way into a story, maybe not, but I have a whole library of books and resources and I love it. I just it's I always need to be chewing on something new or I get bored. I'm like a border collie. I need a job, right? You don't ever want to have a border collie as a pet unless you give that border collie a job. Because if you don't give that border collie a job, it will find its own job and you won't like the job it finds. That's me. I am a border collie.
So what is your
Um,
background? Is it in chemistry or is it in
my
science
my
or
background is a mixture of science and humanities. So my undergraduate degree is basically public health, history of medicine, medical ethics. But I took all the pre-med courses, the sciences, the physics, the chemistry, because I needed those for physical therapy graduate school. And so I have a background in humanities and in science, and um, I just don't tolerate being bored. And I'm always been a self-taught kind of person. My other passion besides ceramics, and I'm going to show something off, show and tell. So I was recently in Iceland and I brought back 2 kilos of yarn. I brought back all this yarn and I made my first Icelandic sweater.
that is beautiful.
Thank you. I have to block it. And of course it's summer, so I won't be wearing it for 6 months, 8 months, but that's okay. So I always have something on my needles, keeps me grounded and focused. Yarn work, I always consider meditation you can wear. So I have projects all around the house. So because I can't actually sit and watch television and just sit there. I just can't. So, my husband likes to watch TV, and if I want to sit with him, I need something to keep my hands busy. So I usually knit in the evenings when we're sort of winding down.
Ah,
So yeah,
so what does your writing space look like? And
anywhere my laptop is.
ah, oh,
In the winter time when I'm at the farm, my writing space is usually my kitchen because that's the warmest room in the house because it has its own wood stove. Um, so that's where I park my laptop in the winter time. In the summer, so I have a little office space set up upstairs in the barn. You can sort of see the woodwork behind me. And it's got a nice window so I can stare out at the trees. Writing is a lot of staring and thinking, so I need to do that. Um, yeah, I'm not one of these writers that needs a particular set of circumstances to write. And part of that was because I started writing when I had young children and I could grab a half an hour here and a half an hour there between things. And so I trained myself to just anywhere I am, kind of hyper focus on what I'm doing, and I could write under almost any circumstances, except when a TV is on and there's people talking words. I can't write when there's words around.
so when you're writing, do you have music on or silence? And if music, what
Some
kind?
Sometimes I have music. I have a whole bunch of movie soundtracks that can I sometimes use that. So um particularly if I know that I'll be writing one book and editing another book. So each book often will have its soundtrack. And if I need to get back into the headspace of the book that I'm editing, I'll just play that music and will, it's a key. It just grounds me back into the book. It's sort of a trigger. So I do that. One of the books I was writing, I wrote to the soundtrack of oh, what was the Del Toro movie with the big kaiju and the big mecha? Oh, crap, what was the name of it? Pacific Rim. I have the Pacific Rim soundtrack, makes a really good writing soundtrack. I also have a bunch of video game soundtracks that my kids have recommended to me. And it's nice because I don't know the video games, so I don't have any associations with music, but there's a cinematic sense to them, and that helps with the writing. But I also write in silence, and that's fine too.
Hey, and do you have to have any like food or drink, special food or drink while you're writing?
Caffeine is writer's fuel, so I am definitely a morning coffee person. Sometime in the afternoon, I usually switch to tea, but I like to always have something in a mug, usually warm even in the summer. But
Mm.
again, I'm not, I don't have really a particular routines. I don't even write at the same time every day. Um,
Mm. Okay. And writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions
oh
to
yes.
help them with their work. And do you have any? And does
To
it help or
help.
hinder you?
I have currently our animal menagerie is just two rescue dogs. So one is a little guy who is ancient. He's probably going to live forever just to spite me because he's part Jack Russell and he's kind of a kook. Um, yeah, he can still jump 4 feet straight up. It's really
Wow.
funny when you're trying to cook at if I'm prepping food, it's like dog on a pogo stick. It jumps up, looks at what you're doing, falls down, jumps up, looks at what you're doing, falls down. I have never had a dog that would beg for lettuce. That is Dustin. He is a bizarre creature. And then my other dog, Maya, is probably part border collie, and we're not really sure other part. Unfortunately, she came to us. They found her as a puppy. Someone had shot her, and so
Oh,
she only has one eye, and we think she probably has some head trauma. Um, she's a little goofy, but she's sweet, and if I'm spending too much time on the computer, she has learned to come up behind me and she'll flick my mouse hand with her nose. So I can't actually do anything. And Dustin will just, if I'm on the sofa typing, Dustin will just jump in my lap and then lay on my keyboard. It's like, nope, mom, no more work. Nope, got to pay attention to me.
Sounds like my cats.
But they're really good listeners. When I'm like, guys, I'm having this trouble with this scene. What do you think of? And they look at me like, oh, mom, you're the best. So,
I love it. So I just have two more questions for you. Oh, actually three. One is how important has the New England setting been to your work?
until now, not really. None of my books have had much setting in real
Right,
places.
right.
The Halcyon books, there's a little bit that happens on Earth, but not in Boston, because this is post climate change and all the coastal cities are gone. So the only city I think that gets mentioned is Chicago, because that's the one city that has not been drowned. The Midwest is still there. But this book, because it takes place in modern day Boston, and I'm familiar with Boston, I've lived here for 32 years. Yeah, it's really important, and I wanted to get the details right. And so we did a lot of driving around. I did a lot of walking around the Boston Medical Center campus, because a lot of what happens in the book is drawn from what happened in real life Boston when they cut the bridge to Long Island, where all the treatment facilities were for drug addicted people with drug problems. And so there was a huge homeless encampment that got built up around Mass and Cass, Mass Ave and Cass, I forget what Cass stands for.
I can't remember.
I have to look it up. They talk about Mass and Cass a lot.
Yeah.
And and so that's where I set this story. And so there's a lot in it that references what's happening now in terms of who we give voice to and who we think are important in society and who we would rather throw away. So there's a lot of social commentary that gets woven in, which I think spec fic is really good for. So yeah, Boston is really key to this story. I don't know. I mean, could it happen in any other place? Sure. But it feels like it sits comfortably in Boston.
Mm, okay. So where can people find your books aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I have to give a
Yep.
plug to Annie's.
Yay,
You can
Annie's.
you can get Lisa's books at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your books?
So all the usual online places, Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, iBooks, some libraries carry my ebooks. And you could always contact me for signed books, or I'd be happy to sign books and bring them over to Annie's. So you can throw business to Annie's. Yeah. And
Okay.
sort of, I'm not a big social media presence about my books, but I am on social media. I'm on Facebook. Oh,
That's my next
sorry, didn't mean
question.
to jump the gun there. I have an
My
author
next question.
page on Facebook, which is, facebook.com/LJ Cohen. I have an Instagram page where you can see stuff about my farm, my knitting, my animals, my crochet, and my ceramics. And that's lj.cohen on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter anymore. Just too much of a dumpster fire for me. Yeah, so connect with me. I have a website, ljcohen.net, which has all the information about all my books. Yeah, happy to connect with readers, other writers.
Great. Well, that's all I have for you. Thank you very much for joining
You're
me,
welcome.
LJ Cohen or Lisa Cohen. And we will be seeing you at the store sometime, I'm sure.
Sounds great. I appreciated the opportunity. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye.